The key was still warm in my trembling hand when I realized my own son had already changed the locks. 3 days. That's how long I'd been gone. Just 3 days to handle what I thought would be a simple estate matter. 3 days, and I came home to find my entire life erased. My clothes in garbage bags on the porch, my photos torn in half and scattered across the driveway like confetti from hell. And my son, my baby boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, standing behind that living room window with his arms crossed, watching me like I was some kind of criminal. The rain started as I pressed my face against the glass, the same window where we used to count raindrops together when he was 5. "Michael!" I screamed, pounding so hard my knuckles split and bled against the pane. "Michael, please, let me explain." But he just shook his head and walked away. 27 years of being his whole world, and he walked away like I was nothing, like I was nobody. The neighbors were watching. Of course they were watching. Mrs. Henderson from next door had her phone out, probably recording the whole damn thing for her Facebook drama group. 3 months ago, these same people were asking me for my famous chocolate chip cookie recipe. Now, they were treating me like some kind of disease. What they didn't know, what Michael didn't know, was that the lawyer's call hadn't just been about Grandma Ruth's will. It had been about the lie I'd been living for 27 years. The lie that made me a millionaire overnight and made my son an orphan in every way that mattered. Because the man Michael called Daddy his whole life, the man whose grave we visited every Father's Day with fresh flowers and long conversations, he wasn't Michael's father. And the real father, the one I'd hidden from my son since the day he was born, had just left us everything in his will. Everything, including a letter that spelled out exactly what kind of woman his mother really was. Standing there in the rain, mascara running down my cheeks like black tears, I realized this wasn't just about being locked out of a house. This was about being locked out of my son's life forever, unless I could somehow undo 27 years of lies, 27 years of protecting him from a truth that was apparently more devastating than I'd ever imagined. The worst part? Looking through that window at the man my little boy had become, I wasn't even sure I deserved a second chance. But I was going to fight for one anyway, because some mistakes are worth everything to fix, even if it destroys you in the process. This is the hardest story I've ever had to tell. If you've ever made a choice that haunted you, if you've ever had to choose between a comfortable lie and a devastating truth, hit that like button. Drop a comment if you think some secrets should stay buried forever, or if you believe every child deserves to know who they really are. And subscribe, because this story is just beginning, and I promise you, the truth is more shocking than you can imagine. The key was still warm in my trembling hand when I realized my own son had already changed the locks. 3 days. That's how long I'd been gone. Just 3 days to handle what I thought would be a simple estate matter. 3 days, and I came home to find my entire life erased. My clothes hung from garbage bags like surrender flags on the porch. 27 years of memories torn in half and scattered across the driveway like confetti from hell. And my son, my baby boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, standing behind that living room window with his arms crossed, watching me like I was some kind of criminal. The rain started as I pressed my face against the glass, the same window where we used to count raindrops together when he was 5. "Michael!" I screamed, pounding so hard my knuckles split and bled against the pane. "Michael, please, let me explain." But he just shook his head and walked away. 27 years of being his whole world, and he walked away like I was nothing, like I was nobody. The neighbors were watching. Of course they were. Mrs. Henderson from next door had her phone out, probably recording the whole damn thing for her Facebook drama group. 3 months ago, these same people were asking me for my famous chocolate chip cookie recipe. Now they were treating me like some kind of disease. What they didn't know, what Michael didn't know, was that the lawyer's call hadn't just been about Grandma Ruth's will. It had been about the lie I'd been living for 27 years. The lie that made me a millionaire overnight and made my son an orphan in every way that mattered. Because the man Michael called Daddy his whole life, the man whose grave we visited every Father's Day with fresh flowers and long conversations, he wasn't Michael's father. And the real father, the one I'd hidden from my son since the day he was born, had just left us everything in his will. Everything, including a letter that spelled out exactly what kind of woman his mother really was. Standing there in the rain, mascara running down my cheeks like black tears, I realized this wasn't just about being locked out of a house. This was about being locked out of my son's life forever. Unless I could somehow undo 27 years of lies, 27 years of protecting him from a truth that was apparently more devastating than I'd ever imagined. The worst part? Looking through that window at the man my little boy had become, I wasn't even sure I deserved a second chance. But I was going to fight for one anyway, because some mistakes are worth everything to fix, even if it destroys you in the process. I found the hotel room at 2 in the morning, using my emergency credit card that thankfully Michael didn't know about. The Motel 6 on Route 9 wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it had 4 walls and a lock that actually worked for me. I sat on the scratchy bedspread, still wearing my rain-soaked clothes, and pulled out the letter that had started this nightmare. "Dear Michael," it began, in handwriting I recognized but had hoped never to see again. "If you're reading this, it means I'm dead and your mother finally had to tell you the truth. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe you found out the hard way, like I did." My hands shook as I read Richard's words from beyond the grave. Richard Morrison, the man I loved desperately, dangerously, and stupidly 28 years ago. The man whose baby I'd carried while wearing another man's wedding ring. The man I'd convinced myself was better off never knowing he had a son. "I've been watching you both from a distance, Michael. Your mother thinks she protected you by keeping us apart, but all she did was rob us both of 27 years. You deserved to know who your real father was. I deserved to know my son." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing how Richard had discovered the truth about Michael's parentage when he hired a private investigator to locate old college friends for a reunion. How he'd learned about the car accident that killed David, the man Michael believed was his father, just 6 months after Michael was born. How he'd watched Michael grow up through social media photos I'd foolishly made public, aching to reach out, but respecting my wishes to stay away. Until now. Until his cancer diagnosis made him realize that silence was just another form of cowardice. "I've left everything to you, son. Not to hurt your mother, but because you're my blood, my legacy, the only good thing I ever created in this world. Use the money wisely. Use it to build the life your mother's lies stole from both of us." But it was the last paragraph that made me vomit into the motel's cracked sink. "Your mother will tell you she did it to protect you? Don't believe her. She did it to protect herself. Because she was married when she got pregnant with you, and revealing the truth would have destroyed her perfect little life. She chose her reputation over your right to know your father. She chose her comfort over our relationship. And now, 27 years later, she's still choosing herself over you. I crumpled the letter and threw it across the room, but the words were already burned into my brain. The worst part wasn't that Richard was wrong. The worst part was that he was absolutely, devastatingly right. I had been protecting myself. I had chosen the easy lie over the complicated truth, and now my son hated me for it. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night staring at the water stain on the ceiling, thinking about all the moments I could have told Michael the truth. His 16th birthday, when he asked why he looked nothing like the man in the photos. His high school graduation, when he gave that speech about following in his father's footsteps as an engineer, when his real father had been a successful architect. His wedding day, when he wished his dad could have been there to walk me down the aisle, too. Every lie had seemed like protection at the time. Every omission felt like love. I'd met Richard in my senior year of college, already engaged to David, but drowning in doubts about marrying my high school sweetheart. Richard was everything David wasn't: dangerous, passionate, unpredictable. He made me feel alive in ways I didn't know were possible. The affair lasted 6 months, ending only when I discovered I was pregnant and Richard got accepted to graduate school across the country. I never told him about the baby. I convinced myself it was David's, despite the timing making that nearly impossible. When Michael was born with Richard's dark eyes and stubborn chin, I told myself genetics were funny things. When David died in that car accident, I told myself it was fate protecting my secret. For 27 years, I'd lived with the weight of that decision. Watching Michael struggle with feeling different, feeling like he didn't quite fit in our family. Watching him develop interests and talents that seemed to come from nowhere, never knowing they came from a father he'd never met. The hotel phone rang at 7 a.m., startling me from my guilty memories. "Mom?" Michael's voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying. "I need to talk to you." My heart leaped. "Yes, sweetheart, of course. Where do you want to meet?" "No," he said, and I could hear the steel in his voice. "I need you to listen. I found more letters, hidden in the house, letters you wrote to him." My blood turned to ice. The letters I'd written to Richard but never sent, stored in my old jewelry box. Love letters filled with regret and longing, wondering what might have been. Letters that painted our affair in romantic terms, not the destructive betrayal it had actually been. "Michael, those letters don't tell the whole story." "They tell enough," he cut me off. "They tell me you were in love with him. They tell me you chose to keep us apart because it was convenient for you. They tell me everything I need to know about who my mother really is." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, and realized I'd just lost my son twice. Once to my lies and once to my truth. Have you ever made a choice that seemed right in the moment, only to realize years later that it destroyed everything you were trying to protect? I drove to the house anyway, knowing he wouldn't let me in, but needing to try. The garbage bags were gone from the porch. Either he'd thrown them away or moved them inside. I didn't know which would hurt more. I sat in my car across the street, watching the windows for any sign of movement. Mrs. Henderson came out to check her mailbox 3 times in an hour, each time glancing over at me with undisguised curiosity. I wanted to roll down my window and scream at her, ask her what she'd do if her biggest mistake came back to destroy her family. But I just sat there, remembering the letters Michael had found. Those letters were my confession booth, written during the lonely nights after David died. Letters to Richard filled with all the things I couldn't say out loud. How I dreamed about him raising Michael. How I wondered if our son had inherited his architectural genius. How I sometimes caught myself looking for Richard's face in crowds, even though I'd chosen a life without him. I watch Michael draw sometimes, and I see your hands in his. The way he holds his pencil, the precision of his lines. He's going to be an artist like you, and he'll never know where that gift came from. I've robbed him of so much, Richard. I've robbed us all. That was from a letter dated 3 years ago, when Michael got into art school. I'd been so proud and so heartbroken at the same time, knowing his real father would have been even prouder. Sometimes I think about calling you. I have your number. I've looked you up 100 times over the years. But what would I say? Hi, remember me? The married woman you had an affair with? Well, surprise, you have a son who thinks his father was a boring engineer instead of a brilliant architect like you. The cruelest letter was the one I'd written after Michael's wedding. He got married today, Richard, to a wonderful girl who makes him laugh. He wore David's watch and cufflinks, and everyone said how much he looked like his father. But standing there at the altar, all I could see was you. The stubborn set of his jaw when he said his vows, the way he ran his hand through his hair when he got nervous. Our son got married today, and his real father wasn't there to see it. I did that. I chose that. Reading those letters now, through Michael's eyes, I could see how they sounded. Not like the anguished confessions of a woman protecting her child, but like the selfish ramblings of someone who wanted to have it both ways. Someone who wanted to keep her secret and her guilt, her comfortable life and her romantic regret. Michael was right. Those letters didn't tell the whole story. They told a worse one. Around noon, I saw him leave through the back door, probably to avoid seeing me. I waited another hour before driving back to the motel, knowing that sitting outside his house was just another form of selfishness, another way of making this about my pain instead of his. The manila envelope was waiting for me at the motel desk when I returned. No return address, but I knew who it was from. Michael had hired someone to dig deeper, and apparently they'd found more than either of us bargained for. Inside were photographs that made my stomach drop. Richard and me, taken 28 years ago outside a coffee shop near campus. Richard and me kissing in his car. Richard and me walking into a hotel together. Someone had been following us even then, documenting our affair with clinical precision. But it was the investigator's report that really destroyed me. Page after page of facts I'd buried so deep, I'd almost convinced myself they weren't true. Subject: Richard Morrison contacted private investigator in 2019 regarding paternity questions about Michael David Thompson. Mr. Morrison provided DNA sample obtained from subject's coffee cup during surveillance at local Starbucks. Paternity confirmed with 99.7% certainty. Richard had been watching us for years, not just through social media, but in person. The investigator had photos of Michael at his college graduation, at his job, at the grocery store. Richard had been living a parallel life, loving his son from a distance, while I played happy family with a lie. The most devastating discovery was a series of emails between Richard and his lawyer, dated just 6 months before his death. I want to approach them, James. I'm dying, and I can't take this secret to my grave. My son deserves to know who his father is. Richard, I strongly advise against direct contact. Given the circumstances of his birth and your past relationship with Mrs. Thompson, this could be seen as harassment or extortion. It's not about money, James. It's about truth. I've missed 26 years of his life because she was too selfish to tell him. I won't miss any more. Then do it through the will. Let the inheritance speak for itself. Make her tell him, but protect yourself legally. The final email was dated 3 weeks before Richard's death. Fine, we'll do it your way, but I want her to suffer the way I've suffered. I want her to lose him the way she made me lose him. Some people don't deserve the love they've stolen. I threw the papers across the room and collapsed on the bed, sobbing until my throat was raw. Richard hadn't just left Michael the inheritance out of love. He'd done it out of revenge. He'd wanted to destroy my relationship with my son the same way I'd destroyed his. And it was working perfectly. The worst part was that I couldn't even be angry about it. This was justice, wasn't it? 27 years of stolen fatherhood deserved 27 years of stolen motherhood. Richard was dead, but he was finally getting his revenge. I just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. I hadn't expected losing Michael to feel like dying. If someone you loved kept you from your child for decades, would revenge feel sweeter than forgiveness? 3 days later, Michael called again. This time, he agreed to meet me at a diner 20 miles outside town, neutral territory where neither of us had memories to haunt us. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble covering his usually clean-shaven face. He'd lost weight, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. But it was his eyes that broke my heart. They looked at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was an enemy. "I've been thinking," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "about all the times I felt different, all the times I didn't fit." I nodded, afraid to speak, afraid I'd say the wrong thing and lose him completely. "When I was 12, I got obsessed with architecture. You told me it was just a phase. When I was 16, I wanted to study in Europe for a year. You said it was too expensive, too dangerous. When I was 22, I met a girl who reminded me of someone, but I couldn't figure out who. Now I know. She looked like him." Each memory was a knife twisting in my chest. "Michael, I thought I was protecting you. From what?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "From having a father who would have understood me? From having a parent who shared my interests, my dreams? From knowing where half of my DNA came from?" "From the truth about what I did," I whispered. "From knowing your mother was an adulteress. From knowing your birth destroyed a marriage." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I cared about your reputation more than I cared about knowing my father? I'd never thought about it that way. In my mind, I'd been protecting Michael from the scandal, from the whispers, from being labeled a bastard in a small town. But looking at him now, I realized I'd been protecting myself from shame while he paid the price in confusion and loneliness." "He left me money," Michael said quietly, "a lot of money, but also a trust fund he's been paying into since the day I was born. Did you know that?" I shook my head, feeling sick. 27 years of child support he wanted to pay but couldn't because you never told him he had a child. 27 years of birthday presents he bought but couldn't send. 27 years of college funds and Christmas accounts and father-son trip savings, all sitting in a bank account waiting for the day he could give them to me. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. I couldn't breathe. "He loved me before he ever met me," Michael continued, "and you stole that from both of us." I wanted to argue, to explain, to make him understand that I'd been young and scared and stupid. But all those reasons felt hollow now, sitting across from the man my little boy had become. The man who'd grown up thinking his father was dead, instead of just hidden away by his selfish mother. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 27 years. I called Richard's number. Of course, it went to voicemail. His voice sounded exactly the same as I remembered, warm, confident, with that slight accent he'd picked up during his year in Italy. "You've reached Richard Morrison. I'm either designing something amazing or drinking coffee somewhere beautiful. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I hung up and called again, just to hear his voice. Then again. On the fourth call, I finally spoke. "Richard, it's Sarah. I know you're gone, but I need to say this. I need you to know that not a day went by when I didn't think about calling you. Not a day when I didn't wonder what our life would have been like if I'd been braver, if I'd been better." I was crying now, sitting in that awful motel room, talking to a dead man who'd hated me. "Michael found your letters. He knows everything now. About the affair, about the lies, about how I kept you away from him. He hates me, Richard. He looks at me the way you probably looked at me all these years, like I'm the villain in this story." The voicemail beeped, cutting me off. I called back. Maybe I am the villain. Maybe I was always the villain, and I just couldn't see it. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was really just protecting myself. I was protecting my marriage, my reputation, my comfortable little life. And you were right. I was selfish, I was cowardly, I was everything you said I was in that letter. Another beep, another callback.
"But I loved you too, Richard. I loved you so much it scared me. That's why I couldn't tell you about Michael. Because if you'd known, you would have tried to take him from me. You would have fought for custody, and I would have lost both of you. So I chose to lose just you instead. I chose the sure thing over the risky thing. I chose fear over love." This time, I let the beep end the call. I sat there in the dark, listening to the highway traffic outside my window, thinking about parallel lives and roads not taken. In another universe, Richard and I had raised Michael together. In that universe, our son grew up knowing both parents, understanding where his talents came from, feeling complete instead of always searching for missing pieces of himself. In that universe, Richard didn't die alone and angry. In that universe, I didn't end up in a motel room talking to voicemails and ghosts. But this wasn't that universe. This was the one where my choices had consequences, where lies eventually surfaced, where love wasn't enough to undo 27 years of deception. This was the universe where I had to live with what I'd done, and somehow find a way to earn forgiveness I probably didn't deserve. The lawyer's office felt like a courtroom where I was both defendant and witness. Michael sat across from me, his posture rigid, his eyes focused anywhere but on my face. Between us sat James Morrison, no relation to Richard despite the name, the attorney who'd helped orchestrate my downfall from beyond the grave. "Mrs. Thompson," he began formally, "your son has asked me to explain the full extent of his inheritance, including provisions that weren't outlined in the initial will reading." I nodded, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Beyond the monetary assets, Mr. Morrison left extensive documentation of his life, specifically focused on his desire to know his son. Photo albums of Michael at various stages, compiled from public social media and school websites. A journal spanning 26 years, detailing his thoughts about fatherhood and his regrets about being absent. And video messages. Video messages? Michael's voice cracked slightly. The lawyer pulled out a laptop and turned it toward us. 12 videos, recorded over the past 2 years. Birthday messages for all the birthdays he missed. Graduation congratulations. Wedding wishes. Advice for various life stages. He wanted Michael to hear his voice, to know what his father would have sounded like offering guidance. I watched my son's face crumble as Richard's image appeared on the screen. Even dying of cancer, Richard was still handsome, still had that magnetic presence that had drawn me to him decades ago. Happy 27th birthday, son. I know I have no right to call you that, but you'll always be my son, even if you never know it. I imagine you're probably working hard, maybe thinking about starting a family of your own. I hope you know how proud I am of the man you've become, even though I can't take any credit for it. Michael made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. I reached for his hand instinctively, but he pulled away. Your mother probably had her reasons for keeping us apart, but I want you to know that not knowing you has been the greatest regret of my life. Not the affair. I could never regret that, because it gave me you. But not fighting harder to be part of your world. That's on me, son. That's my failure as a father. The video ended, and the silence in the room was deafening. There are 11 more, the lawyer said quietly, plus detailed medical history, family genealogy, and a letter explaining his side of the story with your mother. Michael stood abruptly. I need air. He walked out, leaving me alone with the lawyer and the ghost of Richard Morrison on a laptop screen. He was a good man, James said quietly. Angry, yes. Hurt, absolutely. But good. He really did love that boy, Mrs. Thompson, from the moment he found out Michael existed. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. In trying to protect Michael from an absent father, I'd given him a dead one instead.
I found Michael sitting in his car in the parking lot, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they were shaking. I knocked on the passenger window, and after a long moment, he unlocked the door. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us staring straight ahead at the lawyer's office building, where Richard's ghost had just spoken to us. I used to have dreams about my father, Michael said finally. Not David, my real father. I'd dream about a man with dark hair who would teach me to draw, who understood why I saw buildings differently than other people. I thought it was just wishful thinking, missing something I never had. I turned to look at him, but he kept staring forward. But it wasn't wishful thinking, was it? It was genetic memory. Some part of me knew there was someone else out there, someone who would have understood me. Michael. No, he cut me off. I need to say this. I need you to understand what you took from me. His voice was steady now, controlled in a way that scared me more than his anger had. I spent my whole childhood feeling like I was pretending to be someone else's son. I loved David's memory, but I never felt like I belonged to him. I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was broken somehow, defective. Do you know what that does to a kid, feeling like you don't belong in your own family? Each word was a physical blow. I'd watched him struggle with identity his entire life, attributing it to normal teenage angst or artistic temperament. I'd never realized he felt like an outsider in his own home. And then, when David died, I felt guilty for not grieving the way you did. I felt guilty for feeling relieved that I didn't have to pretend anymore. What kind of sick kid feels relieved when his father dies? You weren't sick, I whispered. You were just lost, he finished. I was lost because half of who I am was missing, and you knew where to find it. You knew, and you chose to let me stay lost. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw 27 years of confusion and pain in his eyes. I could have known him, Mom. He could have been at my graduation, my wedding. He could have taught me about architecture, about art, about being a man. Instead, he died alone, and I'll never get to meet the person who gave me half my DNA. I was trying to protect you. From what? From being loved? From having a father who actually understood me? From knowing where I came from? He started the engine, and I realized this conversation was ending. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, he said quietly. I don't know if what you took from me is something I can ever get back. 6 months have passed since that day in the parking lot. 6 months of silence, of phone calls that go straight to voicemail, of holidays spent alone in a new apartment across town. 6 months of living with the consequences of 27 years of choices. But today, something changed. I was at the grocery store, the same one where Richard's investigator had apparently photographed Michael years ago, when I saw him. He was in the produce section, picking through apples with the same careful attention he'd always given to everything. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I considered leaving, avoiding another confrontation, another reminder of what I'd lost. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he looked, tired but not broken, sad but not defeated. Maybe it was the small photo sticking out of his wallet as he paid, a photo I recognized as one of Richard from the inheritance materials. "Michael," I said, quietly, approaching him near the parking lot. He turned, and for the first time in months, he didn't immediately look away. "Mom," his voice was neutral, careful. "How are you?" I asked, though I could see he was still struggling, still processing everything he'd learned. "I'm seeing a therapist," he said matter-of-factly, "trying to work through some things. The anger, the grief. Turns out losing a parent you never knew you had is complicated." I nodded, grateful he was getting help I couldn't provide. "I've been watching the videos," he continued, "the ones Richard left. He talks about you sometimes, about the affair, about being young and stupid and in love with someone he couldn't have." My heart clenched. "He wasn't entirely wrong about you, Mom, but he wasn't entirely right either." We stood there in the parking lot, two people who'd loved the same man in different ways, both casualties of choices made decades ago. "I may never forgive you completely," Michael said finally, "but I don't want to lose what's left of my family. I don't want to become someone who punishes people forever for their mistakes." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't even forgiveness. But it was something. It was a door, slightly open. "I'd like that," I whispered. "I'd like to try to earn back what I lost." "It won't be the same," he warned. "I'm not the same person I was before I knew the truth." "I know," I said. "I'm not the same person either." He nodded and started to walk away, then turned back. "Maybe we can figure out who we are now, together." As I watched him drive away, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, it was too soon for that, but hope. The possibility that some mistakes, even devastating ones, don't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes they can be the beginning of a different one. This has been the hardest story I've ever shared with you. If you've ever faced the consequences of choices that seemed right at the time, if you've ever had to choose between comfortable lies and painful truths, please hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think some secrets should stay buried, or does everyone deserve to know the truth about where they come from? And subscribe, because stories like this remind us that even our biggest mistakes don't have to define us forever. Sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for believing that broken families can find ways to heal. We're all just trying to love each other better, one painful truth at a time.